And greetings, everyone. Welcome to Lynnhurst Community News. Today is Wednesday, July 12th, and this is episode 15. I'm Brian Haggerty, and I'm happy to be here each week to bring you the very best of what's happening around our township, in our clubs, schools, organizations, churches, and sports. And if you have any news within any of those, make sure, as well as any birthdays or anniversaries of note, we do have a great one coming up soon. But if you do, just email them to lyndhurstcommunitynews@gmail.com. And don't worry about having to write that down, because that will be listed in the description box below. And we also invite you as well, if you enjoy this weekly broadcast, to kindly share it with your friends on Facebook, or you can send them an email link. And also, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. You need a Gmail account to do that, but once you subscribe, click that little notification bell, and you'll always be notified when a new episode is out. But then again, a new episode is out every single Wednesday. If you have anything for each week's broadcast, if you're going to email it, just make sure you get it to us no later than Tuesday around 12 noon. Okay, so this is the week, the biggest week of the summer here in Lynnhurst, as our two largest annual and traditional events begin. The Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, as well as our Concerts Under the Stars, begins today. Today is Wednesday, again, July 12th. And we continue this until Saturday. So last week I discussed each musical group that would be performing. So if you want more information on them, just give last week's episode a listen. This week, we want to talk more about what's happening at the actual feast. Well, for those of you who know, this will be old news for you, but the feast is just loaded. It's like literally taking the Point Pleasant Beach Boardwalk and putting it on Delafield and Court Avenues. There's something there for everyone. They have rides for the kids. They have games, and of course, they have food, and lots of it. What would an Italian feast be without food, such as sausage and peppers and fennel cakes and all sorts of things? By the way, if you want them, they'll even have them packaged to go, so it's not as if you have to sit there and eat, but I highly suggest you do, because you're certainly going to run into a bunch of old friends. Now, by the way, discount ride tickets are available up until today at 3 p.m., They're available at the rectory only, but I'm sure not too many of you are going to get to hear this in time. But that's okay. There's also going to be a beer and wine garden where you can go in and, try different types of wines and different types of beers. And that's usually located right there off the street, right in the park area. And, of course, rides and games for all ages. Now, the biggest day, of course, is the Saturday evening. That's when the feast, which years ago used to start early in the afternoon, as years have gone by, and it's harder to get volunteers as well to stand all those hours in the heat. But now it begins at 5 p.m. Now, here's the thing, too. They have a Super 50-50. And when I say super, it's big. The tickets are only $5. So $5 to win the Super 50-50. Now, that will be drawn, the winner will be drawn on Saturday, which is the last day, July 15th, right after the last concert. This is how they do it every year. And last year's 50-50 lucky winner took home $32,980. And you do not, repeat, you do not have to be there in order to win. So imagine that. $5 for a chance, and I hope whoever wins it is someone who generally can use it. And if not, you help out others by giving it to people who can generally use it. So good luck to everybody. And then on Sunday, now even though the feast is technically over, this is where their yearly tradition that goes back, I would say, well over 100 years begins. And that's where the Lady of Mount Carmel, they have a procession through the neighborhood. Again, a very old tradition down there in what we've always called the Hook. And they do this to honor their patroness, which is Mary, the Mother of God, under the title of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And that's at Sunday, July 16th. Mass is at 12 p.m., and the procession will immediately follow. Now, the procession will then begin from the church to 10th Street, down Sanford Avenue, and conclude back at the parish center. So they will march the statue of Our Lady, and people generally pin all of the money, the cash money, to the statue. It's a sight to behold, but again, it is a very long-standing tradition. So if you want to be a part of that, or even if you want to stand there and observe it, that will be on Sunday. All righty, so now moving on. Club information here. This was provided by Annette Bortone of the Lynnhurst Women's Club. So last night, which was July 11th, at the regular monthly meeting of the Board of Commissioners of the Township, the Women's Club was honored by the commissioners. They were being presented with a proclamation declaring that Saturday, September 30th, is now a day of service in the Township of Lyndhurst. The General Federation of Women's Clubs and the New Jersey Federation of Women's Clubs will be participating in collecting food to feed the hungry across the United States. The Women's Club would like to thank Insera ShopRite Supermarkets for allowing their club to collect food donations outside of their store on Saturday, September 30th, and members will be at the entrance doors from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. And also, food and ShopRite gift cards are also welcome. Now, those of you who are new to town, when I say Insera, or we say Insera Supermarkets, we are referring to the fact that the ShopRite we have in Lynnhurst is owned by the Insera family. The Insera family were originally from this township, long before it was even probably Lynnhurst, and Patsy Insera, the founder, had a little tiny store up on Ridge Road by 2nd Avenue, right up by me. And it grew over the years. Then he wound up building a bigger one on Valley Brook Avenue across from the town hall, which we remember as well. And then they extended and they began to buy other ShopRites in other areas, and it grew into an enormous, enormous business for the family. But they never forgot where they came from. Anytime anyone from Lynnhurst calls them, now Larry, of course, Insera was the son of Patsy. He was the one who truly expanded it. Now Larry has since passed. His sons are running the show. But if you ever need anything from the township and you call them, they always, always come to our assistance. So thank you to all of the Inseras. All right, moving on with organizations. So the Lynnhurst Historical Society's next meeting will be held at the Parks Department building at 250 Cleveland Avenue on Thursday, July 20th at 7 p.m. Now, if you're interested in the history of the township, you are invited to attend and encouraged to join. The Little Red Schoolhouse, by the way, is opened on the second and fourth Sunday, so mark your calendars, of the month, and that's from 2 to 4 p.m. There is no cost of admission. It is free, and I highly encourage anyone to pay a visit to the Historical Society, which is located in the Little Red Schoolhouse on Riverside Avenue, right across from the county park. Now remember, it's free, so bring your children. And they always, throughout the year, have various historical displays taking place there, which you can see and view throughout every other Sunday on Lynnhurst history. So give them some support and go down there and enjoy yourselves. It's always a great visit. Now, on this broadcast, you know I always bring up some of Lynnhurst's history. And I love to bring it into the story, just as I did with the Inseras, because, again, these are things that, while those of us who grew up here know, many of the newer people to the township don't know. And I always feel it's important that people know their history, because it allows you to feel that you're a part of something. Because if you live in this community, if you've come here with your families and you've bought a home, or if you're looking to buy a home, you are a part of this community. And last week we talked about the history of Marin Oval, which is the property on which the new middle school sits. And that history was brought to us courtesy of Joe Cafone, author of the definitive history book called My Lynnhurst. And again, as I always say, it's available on Amazon. I highly suggest you get it. It's fascinating. It's unbelievably in-depth. I don't think there's anything left to be discovered about Lynnhurst history after the work Joe did. So thank you, Joe. Now, so today, being that it is summer, I wanted to talk about what actually attracted people to Lynnhurst in the 19th century, that being the 1800s and beforehand. Now, this was long before the township developed into the grid of roads and streets lined with suburban homes. It was at this time that Lynnhurst, which hadn't even had its name yet, it was Union Township. And as we discussed several episodes ago, it was called Union Township only because we were the last tract of land, meaning the geographical borders of what is now Lynnhurst, was the last tract of land that was once part of the larger Union Township, but Rutherford, North Arlington, East Rutherford, all these other areas had already incorporated into their own townships. So we were yet to do that. That didn't take place until 1917. But it was Union Township. The area east of Ridge Road was called Kingsland, even though that was not a township. That was more of a postal zone. And Lyndhurst at that time, the middle sections, were all farms. And believe it or not, it was also a resort. Yeah, Lyndhurst was a resort. In fact, there were hotels along Riverside Avenue, and there was even a racetrack, which was located behind the Masonic Club. Now, the Masonic Club is the oldest structure in the township. It was erected in 1797, and it's right off of Valley Brook Avenue. If you're heading down Valley Brook Avenue toward Riverside, you make a left, and then there's that ancient old building. And that was originally the home of the Van Winkle family. Now, interestingly enough, that home was rumored to have underground tunnels leading, supposedly, all the way into areas of Belleville. Now, that would have meant that the tunnels would have had to have gone under the river, which would have been pretty much an amazing technological feat at that time. But those were the rumors. And these tunnels were rumored to have been used in the Revolutionary War times for the underground, or for the transportation, I guess, of soldiers and supplies. Those were the stories that we all heard. Now, again, according to local lore, that's what they use these for, supplies, everything done in secret. Now, these stories definitely pique one's imagination. However, about a decade ago, I was at an event down there at the Masonic Club, and I met one of the members. And my being a history buff and also being fascinated with these stories of tunnels, I couldn't resist. I had to ask him. So I asked him, were there any signs of any tunnels, or were there any tunnels, or what's in the basement? He said that if there were any tunnels, there was nothing left of them, not in these days, which would make sense because it has been several centuries. But he said it was most likely that there was a tunnel that led to the edge of the river, and that if a boat pulled up in the river, people would be able to use the tunnel to access the house. Now, that makes far more sense to me than some large labyrinth of a tunnel system connecting all of the undergrounds. I also think, though, by the way, and again, old-timers will know this, I think what added to that lore of these tunnels was the fact that Lyndhurst also had copper mines. Now, these mines, which I remember, were accessed through the cliff that is up at Madison Street. That's the highest street in town. You could see the whole New York skyline, the whole Meadowlands area. And the entrances to those mines were down below on the cliff. In fact, as when we were kids, we would scale our way down, and we would see all of these tunnels and all of these mines. And we would go in. We wouldn't go in too far because, boy, was it dark, and, we were pretty much afraid to venture too far in. Probably the closest or the most we ever did was 20 feet. And we certainly didn't want anybody to know, like our parents. So I think that's where this whole myth of tunnels throughout the town joined with the myth and the lore of the Van Winkle house tunnels underneath the Passaic River. I think it through typical telling of tales and lore, and as most things get handed down generation, decade after decade, some people kind of expand upon it, or they kind of recreate it a little bit to fit what they believe may be the case. So no, I don't believe that there's a system and a network of tunnels under the township. Most of the houses being built would have certainly encountered them. But there were copper mines, and they were throughout the area, including in North Arlington. So yeah, I think that was the source of all of those lores. But as far as the Van Winkle house having a tunnel from the home down to the river, that I can understand. That I can see, but in no way does it exist. So, yes, Lynnhurst was farms and a resort community. So how, you ask, was it a resort community? Well, very simply put, at that time, people swam in the Passaic River. They swam in the old lake on Lake Avenue, which is how it got its name. And, of course, that lake was filled in later on to build homes. And they also swam in the many rivers, streams, and tributaries that were in the Meadowlands. Because remember, this was decades before all of these waters became polluted. We're talking about the 1800s into the early part of the 1900s. There was no industry. We weren't dumping garbage in the Meadowlands. So people instead were able to swim. So the next question is, why Lynnhurst, or Union Township as it was? Well, I could actually give a little bit of light on that because on my mother's side of the family, her great-great-grandfather, his name was Raphael Guidetti, and her other great-grandfather, whose name was Pietro Angelo Carella, now they both lived and worked in the city. Guidetti owned a funeral home on Mulberry Street. And so Lynnhurst, again, Union Township, was actually the first stop from Hoboken. So you would come across the water, and people left the city to travel what was, quote-unquote, the country, because Lynnhurst was country, as they called it. And this was where they vacationed. You took the ferry off, over the Hudson River. You got on a train at Hoboken, and the first stop, in those days, there was no Secaucus Junction. The first stop was Kingsland. So as I said in previous episodes, the original Kingsland station was not the one on Ridge Road that we know of today, which is next to the pastry shop. It was at the foot of Warren Street, which is a dead end off of Valley Brook Avenue. In fact, it was right there on that street where my great-great-grandfather built his home. Why not? Get off the train, walk to your house. Not only he, but also the Frangipan family, the Stellato family, and across the street on Valley Brook Avenue, you also had the Mostardo family, and all the other early families who settled here in the 19th century, like the Savino family, the Palazzi family, the Garofalo family, the Dunn family, the Houghton family. And if I missed anybody's names, I apologize. But I always just loved how Lynnhurst was always a community of families whose lineage goes back well into the 1800s and whose ancestors are still here. Most of the streets in the town, by the way, are named after the families who owned the large tracts of property which were used as farms. And it wasn't until the early 20th century when those streets were created and subdivided into the subsequent smaller lots on which the homes were later built, bringing Lynnhurst into the township as we know it today. Interesting stuff, right? You wouldn't believe it. Well, most people, when you tell that story that Lynnhurst was a resort and that people swam here, they just can't, they laugh. So yes, the last parcel of Union Township in 1917, it was created into its own identity known as the Township of Lyndhurst. And it was a farming and resort area where people came to swim. They would relax and enjoy the breezes on a riverside hotel porch. And by the way, if you get Joe Caffone's book, you'll see some of the photographs of some of those original hotels and buildings. And they were quite large, but typical, beautiful of 19th century architecture. You could bet on horse races and otherwise just relax in the country. You could still relax here. It still is. Of course, the population has certainly grown since then, but you could still relax. Lyndhurst is still a rather very quiet town, especially in the summer. So I hope you've enjoyed that piece of Lyndhurst history. And next time, I want to talk about the many, many small mom-and-pop stores. We had so many of them throughout the township. Every neighborhood had a mom-and-pop store. So if you needed anything, you didn't even have to get in your car. And that's one of the reasons why we had neighborhood stores, is because not everybody had a car. And actually, back in the early part of the century, nobody had a car. You could have jumped on the trolley on Ridge Road and gone into Kearney, but who wanted to do that when you could walk to your neighborhood store and deal with a family? In other words, they were owned by families too, and people who you knew for 30, 40, 50 years. We still have some small stores, luncheonettes and things, but unfortunately the days of the grocery store in a neighborhood are long since gone. And as I said, the ShopRite, the original Patsy Insera, it was not called ShopRite, it was Insera's. That began as a neighborhood store. So that's a great Lyndhurst success story as well. So don't forget, folks, remember to bring your whole family to the feast to enjoy it along with everyone else, because summer will be over before you know it. So make the most out of it that you can. And also, don't forget to always make sure that the batteries in your smoke detectors and CO2 detectors are working. The fire department always reminds me to say that on the show. Those are our volunteer firemen, of course. And if you don't have a smoke detector or CO detector, get them today, because they are cheap, effective. It can save you and your family's lives. So until next week, God bless everyone, and God bless Lynnhurst.